At my cousin's engagement party, my parents chuckled with that all too familiar tone. "Still no fiancé?" they said, half joking, half serious, as if my singlehood was some quirky phase I'd outgrow. My imaginary fiancé had become a running joke in the family. I smiled, lifted my glass in a quiet toast, and waited. Then he walked in. Tall, calm, real. "Sorry I'm late," he said, brushing off his jacket. "Had to park the helicopter." Silence, then stunned faces. Some jaws may have dropped into the samosas. What they didn't know? We just landed from Dubai. I'm 34, female, and from a traditional Indian American family based in Northern California. My parents came to this country with big dreams and a very clear roadmap for how to live a good life. Go to a top-tier college, Stanford or Berkeley ideally, become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Marry a nice Indian boy before 30, have 2 kids, and live within 30 miles of your parents, so they can babysit on weekends and casually audit your spice rack when they drop off Tupperware. And for a while, I tried to follow that script. I really did. But at 21, I hit strike one. I chose design over medicine. Creativity didn't quite fit the mold of stable or reputable, and my extended family didn't know whether to be disappointed or confused. My mom cried when I told her I wasn't going to apply to med school. My dad offered to pay for 1 more year of thinking time. But I knew, I felt, this was the path for me. Strike 2 came when I dropped out of graduate school. My parents, Arvind and Priya, did not take it well. To them, freelancing basically meant unemployed, and remote consulting sounded like code for sitting around in pajamas pretending to work. Every conversation felt like a mini job interview where I had to defend my life choices. Again. But the biggest shocker? Telling them I was engaged. And that they couldn't meet him yet. That was strike 3 in their book. They'd always been wary of my love life. I didn't exactly stick to their script. I dated outside the community, didn't parade boyfriends around unless it was serious, and took my sweet time letting anyone in. So when I met Zaid, an aeronautics consultant and pilot living between Sweden and Qatar, I kept it close. For almost a year. When I finally told them, my mom paused, narrowed her eyes and asked, "Why haven't we met him? Are you sure he's real?" It could have been funny if she hadn't been completely serious. Fast forward to December of last year. My cousin Dia, 29, was getting engaged to Armin, a cardiac surgeon with Ivy League credentials and the kind of resume you could probably frame and hang in a mandap. He was the dream. Smart, successful, well-spoken, and most importantly, checked every single box on the perfect Indian son-in-law checklist. My parents were thrilled. My extended family? Glowing. There were murmurs about how Dia always knew what she wanted, and how nice it must be to have such a settled boy. The engagement party? It wasn't just a party, it was an event. Think. A massive banquet hall in San Jose, 3 days of celebrations, a pre-event sangeet with choreographed dance numbers, custom menus, professional lighting, henna stations, and even a live sadar performance at brunch. I'm not exaggerating. There was a custom hashtag and everything. So when I got the invitation, I wasn't surprised. But I was surprised by the handwritten postscript from my mom. "Hope your fiancé can make it this time." The smiley face? Honestly, it felt like a slap wrapped in glitter. The backstory: Zaid and I had already planned to be in California over the holidays. He had business meetings in Palo Alto, and we were spending time with friends down in LA. We were flying in from Dubai, where we'd been based that month. So yeah, we were in the US, but apparently, our relationship still needed to be proven in person, like a passport at immigration. Zaid had a last-minute meeting the afternoon of the engagement party, but promised he'd meet me there by dinner. The kicker? We were flying around in a helicopter. I know how that sounds. Excessive. Ridiculous. Very my super sweet 16 energy. But it actually made sense. Zaid was borrowing a friend's aircraft to hop between meetings, and given Bay Area traffic and back-to-back events, it was weirdly practical. So I showed up solo. And right on cue, the whispers started. The subtle glances, the faux concerned smiles, the slow sips of champagne as relatives approached like I was an open tab at a gossip bar. "Where's your fiancé? Still in?" "What is it, Doha? Have you thought about freezing your eggs?" "We just worry, Anna. You're such a free spirit." Free spirit. I bit my tongue, smiled, took selfies with Dia, tried to stay present. For her, for the moment, for the version of me that still wanted to be a good cousin. But then I heard my mother. She was standing at a cocktail table near the bar, laughing with her sister, Dia's mom, and a few aunties. Loud enough that I didn't have to try to overhear. I wish I hadn't. "I've stopped asking," she said, like it was an inside joke. "She says he's in aviation." "What does that even mean?" my aunt replied. "Is he a flight attendant?" "She never shows photos," my mom added. I told Arvand maybe he's imaginary. And they all burst out laughing. Not the quiet kind. Not the graceful, hand-over-mouth kind. This was the full-on, open-mouthed, head-thrown-back kind of laughter. The kind that leaves no doubt you're the punchline. I stood nearby, gripping a glass of sparkling water, trying to keep my hands steady. It wasn't the first time I'd heard my life turned into entertainment. But this one stung. I should have walked away. Left it behind. Found someone to distract me. Instead, I just stood there and let it wash over me. I wasn't hurt. I was tired. Tired of having to justify every choice. Tired of feeling like I had to present proof of my happiness, my relationship, my life, as if I needed a slideshow of receipts just to be taken seriously. There was nothing left to say to them. But I had a feeling my moment was coming. After dinner, the speeches began. Daya's friends spoke. Armin's cousins toasted with practiced charm. There were sweet stories, a few inside jokes, and even Neil, my younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to in months, got up and made a sentimental speech about finding your person. And then, all eyes turned to me. I hadn't been asked to speak. No one gave me a heads up. But I guess I looked too polished to sit silently in the corner. I was the older cousin, the out-of-town one. And in a wine-colored silk sari, with my hair up and gold jewelry catching the light just right, I looked like someone who had something to say. So they handed me the mic. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. I looked out at a room full of people who had questioned me, doubted me, joked about me. Faces I grew up with. Faces that still saw me as the girl who colored outside the lines and couldn't possibly know what she was doing. I hadn't rehearsed, but the words came anyway. "I'll keep it short," I said. "It's a beautiful thing, watching two people be supported, celebrated, and believed in. Not everyone gets that, so if you do, hold on to it." Polite claps followed, some confused looks, a few exchanged glances. It wasn't what they were expecting. But I hadn't come here to give them what they expected. I stepped down, passed the mic, took a sip of my water, and then I heard it. A low, steady hum. Barely there at first, like a ceiling fan in the distance, then louder, heavier, rhythmic. The unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. People started murmuring. Dia looked out the window, brows furrowed. The planner rushed to the door, headset askew, whispering something into her mic. And then, Zaid walked in. He was wearing a slim-fit navy suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt casually undone. His watch caught the chandelier light as he moved, hair slightly windswept in a way that said, "Yes, I did just step out of a helicopter. And no, I'm not trying to impress you. But I probably just did." He looked completely out of place. But in that kind of way that suddenly made everyone else look slightly underdressed. "Sorry I'm late," he said with a grin. "Had to park the helicopter." Someone actually gasped, out loud, and then he walked straight toward me, steady and unbothered, as if he'd done this 100 times before. He kissed me gently on the forehead. "Did I miss your toast?" he asked, his voice soft. "Just for me." "No," I said, smiling. "You're right on time." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted. I didn't need to look around to feel it. The vibe had changed. Completely. Gone was the condescending curiosity, the thinly veiled judgment, the polite smiles hiding side eyes. That familiar static of, "Oh, poor Anna, still figuring it out," gone. Now it was something else entirely. People were suddenly alert, curious. Their glances weren't laced with pity or passive aggression anymore. They were wondering, who is this guy? Their eyes followed Zaid as he calmly introduced himself to the people nearest us. My dad's business partner, a second cousin, the uncle who always calls me Beta, like he's performing in a soap opera. And then, my aunt, Dia's mom. The same woman who just an hour ago was laughing at the idea of Zaid's existence. She now stood frozen for a moment, scrambling to rearrange her face into something between a welcoming smile and "I definitely didn't say anything mean 5 cocktails ago." Zaid greeted her politely. Warm, but not performative. Confident, but not cocky. And then there was my mother. She was standing a few feet away, fidgeting with the edge of her dupatta. Her mouth slightly parted, caught mid-reaction. Like her body couldn't decide whether to hold on to disbelief or surrender to the reality walking straight toward her. There was no script for this moment. No pre-written cultural response to my daughter's very real, very handsome, helicopter-arriving fiancé has just walked in and shattered every assumption I've ever made. So she stood there. And I stood there too. Not to prove anything. Not to win. Just present. Rooted. Whole. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink or explain or soften the edges of my story for it to be accepted. He was here. I was here. And suddenly, that was enough. Zaid greeted her without a second thought. "Priya auntie, it's so nice to finally meet you," he said with a warm smile, offering his hand. My mom hesitated for just a beat too long before taking it. The handshake was polite, but there was an edge of reluctance in her grip. "Oh," she replied, her tone a little stiff. "Yes, of course, hello." It was the exact tone she used when speaking to neighbors she didn't really connect with. People who had too many lawn ornaments or dogs that barked all night. Yet they still had to keep things civil. Zaid, undeterred, turned to my dad, who had been standing a few feet behind her. He was composed, but I could tell he was just as surprised by the situation as my mom. The mask of politeness barely hid his discomfort. "Arvan uncle," Zaid said, offering a respectful nod. "I've heard a lot about you." My dad responded with a firm handshake, a bit too firm, as if he was trying to hide his discomfort. He was good at masking it, but I saw it. The brief flicker in his eyes, the subtle tightening around his jaw. The tension in the air was palpable. They were trying, but the surprise of Zaid's arrival was undeniable. He was sizing Zaid up, no doubt about it, the same way he sized up potential business partners or unfamiliar real estate developers. My dad's sharp, calculating gaze was unmistakable. as though he was trying to assess whether Zaid measured up to the expectations he'd silently set for anyone I'd bring home. "I understand you work in aviation?" he asked, his voice casual but with an underlying edge of scrutiny. Zaid didn't flinch. He simply nodded, calm and composed, like this was just another conversation. "Yes, mostly consulting now. Projects across Europe, the Gulf, and Asia. But I still fly occasionally. Keeps me grounded, ironically." The words hung in the air for a second, and a few people nearby let out a chuckle. It wasn't because the joke was particularly funny. It wasn't that kind of laugh. It was the kind of laugh you get when someone's recalibrating their understanding of a person. When the unexpected lands in a room full of expectations, and the sound of surprise escapes in the form of an awkward, polite laugh. In that moment, something shifted. No longer was I the delusional daughter who had fabricated an international fiancé to escape questions at family gatherings. No, suddenly I became that cousin. The one who walked in alone, only for her partner to dramatically descend from the sky, helicopter and all, like a plot twist in a movie. Still, it wasn't really about the helicopter. Okay, fine, maybe it was a little about the helicopter. But at its core, it was about presence, about showing up. And Zaid had done that in a way that no one in that room could ignore. He didn't need a dramatic entrance to prove himself. His very existence in that room, with his quiet confidence and charm, had made everything else fade into the background. It wasn't just about the fact that he had arrived in style. It was about how he carried himself. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, but in doing so, he had everyone's attention. As Zaid got swept into conversations with some of my second cousins and curious uncles, who were now all asking him about his travels and his fascinating line of work, I found myself standing back for a moment. I let the scene unfold, taking it all in. It was like watching a slow motion shift in the air. There was this subtle energy that had transformed the atmosphere in the room. It was surreal. For years I had walked into rooms like this, quietly bracing myself for the weight of judgment, for the familiar glances that sized me up in ways that felt both invisible and inescapable. It was a feeling I knew too well. The need to defend my choices without ever being asked. But tonight, everything had shifted. Tonight, I was the storm. My cousin Neil, still riding high from his self-satisfied speech earlier, made his way toward me, his grin smug as ever. Dessert was being served, and he was in the mood to make his usual rounds, looking for someone to play his game of catch me if he can. "So," he said, leaning in slightly, his eyes flicking over to where Zaid was still surrounded by a small crowd, clearly making an impression. "That's your guy?" I met his gaze, feeling a bit of fatigue creep in, but also a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let this moment slip by. Not now. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "That's Zaid." Neil gave a short, almost dismissive laugh, still staring at Zaid as though trying to figure out if this was some elaborate joke I'd set up just to mess with everyone. "Didn't think he was real, to be honest," he said, a little too casually, like it was an afterthought. "Yeah," I replied, matching his tone, but with a hint of something sharper underneath. "A lot of people didn't." He paused, just long enough for me to know that he was probably considering whether to apologize for his earlier doubts or shift the conversation somewhere else. But I wasn't interested in either. Before he had a chance to say anything else, I walked away, heading toward Dea, who was standing a bit off to the side. To her credit, Dea didn't seem bothered by the attention Zaid's dramatic entrance had attracted. She'd always been like that. Graceful, grounded, never rattled by the chaos around her. And she had just the right balance of rebellion and calm to silently support me without making a scene. It was one of the things I loved most about her. As I approached, she gave my hand a squeeze, her eyes warm with a smile that said everything I needed to hear. "Best moment of the night?" she whispered, her voice light but filled with a kind of understanding. I couldn't help but smile back, a little embarrassed but grateful. "I wasn't trying to upstage you," I said, my voice soft but sincere. "You didn't," she replied, her smile widening. "You just reclaimed your place. And about damn time." Her words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. Reclaim my place? It was simple, but it resonated deeply. For years I'd let others define where I fit in, let them dictate my role. But now, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting for validation. Tonight I was just showing up as myself. And that was enough. Later, as the evening wore on and people began to filter out toward the valet area, my mom quietly pulled me aside. She had that look on her face. The one that came when she was unsettled but curious. Like she wasn't quite sure how to process everything that had just happened. We stood near the staircase. The noise of the party a distant hum behind us. "Why didn't you tell us he was coming?" she asked, her tone soft, but with an edge of uncertainty. I shrugged, a little tired but still unwilling to let her avoid the question that had been hovering in the air for so long. "Would it have changed anything?" I asked, the words hanging between us sharp and heavy. She hesitated. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and for a moment I wondered if she would give me the same old answer. The one that deflected or minimized my choices. But instead, she looked back at me. Her eyes filled with something different. I didn't realize." "Realize what?" I asked, crossing my arms, suddenly bracing myself for something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. She took a breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her dupatta as she tried to find the right words. "I didn't realize he was this serious." And there it was. The weight of everything we hadn't said. The years of silence, of half-formed questions and unexplained doubts, all crashing down in that one moment. It was the unsaid that had been simmering for so long. The weight of every conversation we'd never had. Every time I tried to explain my life, my choices, and was met with concern, doubt, or dismissal. It had all led to this. It was the way they made me feel like I was messing up adulthood, because I didn't follow their script. But today, she was trying. Slowly, a little awkwardly, but still trying. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer. "I'm glad you came." I looked at her, feeling something shift, something I hadn't realized was missing before. "Me too," I said. And for the first time that night, I really meant it. Not for them, but for me. A little while later, Zaid found me on the rooftop garden. The atmosphere up there was a welcome escape. Quieter, away from the flashing cameras, the endless buffet lines, the swirl of people. Just a bit of peace. He slid up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "How'd it go?" he asked softly.